First of all, about the summit, as I see it, there is a goal to declare that there is a unity inside NATO, but there are some concerns about the differences between the US and Europe. Do you feel it? Do you see it?
Not on the topics that have been decided upon. So I think it is important to make a distinction on, are there differences between NATO, within NATO on different topics between 32 sovereign states? The answer is yes. There will always be differences of opinion, culturally, historically, economically, politically. So that is not new. The challenge every time that the Secretary General has is the topics we want to have an agreement upon, that's where the unity lies. Okay. And if we agree on the important topics, we can sort of disagree on the less important topics. Okay. So this summit is a good example where the scope of the summit has been limited to make sure that we only talk about the important stuff. Because a number of summits in the last 3 years had declarations of 45, 50 articles. Yeah. Talking about basically everything, including climate change and diversity, and not that it's not important, but now the summit has been limited to a number of things, which is the money that is connected to the capability target, that is the shopping list for every nation to make sure that we build the shield to deter and defend against the two threats, Russia and the terrorist organizations. Okay. And the 3.5% is the money that is necessary to basically buy the stuff that we need to buy.
Speaking about Russian threat, it is in communique, as I understand. But still, what is the threat that Russia actually imposes against NATO? Because I hear that representatives of Russian government are saying that this is just a myth, that it's not there, that there is no threat, and NATO is just militarizing against Russia just to get militarized, not because Russia is a long-term or even short-term threat to NATO members. What would you answer to these people, including Dmitry Medvedev, who actually said that Brussels is the main threat, the biggest aggression and aggressor against Russian Federation?
Yeah, so it's interesting. First, 2 days before the full-fledged invasion in Ukraine, Putin said to Macron, there's nothing going to happen. We're here for an exercise, so don't worry. We're not posing any threat. And he lied. So
as usual.
As usual. And Medvedev is really the crazy guy in the Kremlin, who every week talks about nuclear attacks and things like that. So, second, we know basically that Russia is reconstituting its armed forces. The Russian defense industry is producing more than they need in Ukraine. If Russia would really see NATO as a threat, then they would have responded completely different to the accession of Finland. They didn't. They got a new border with NATO, not only Finland, but NATO, 1,340 kilometers, and they didn't move one soldier from Ukraine to the border with Finland, to the border with NATO. Yeah. So Russia knows NATO is not a threat. Russia knows NATO will not attack Russia. So this is the story that they need for internal consumption, to tell that we are a threat. They are rebuilding their armed forces. Russia is producing in 3 months what North America and Europe are producing together in 1 year. So this is a serious concern. And on top of that, we know the intentions of Russia. That's what they told NATO in December 2021, when they said we need the buffer zone around Russia, which constitutes the Baltic states, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, which is the nations that became a member since 1997. So this is not only about Ukraine.
Are you saying that Russia can invade these countries?
They want the buffer zone. I'm not saying they have now active ideas or plans to invade those countries, but they are rebuilding their armed forces. They are making sure that, especially of course, their land forces are becoming strong again. Their maritime and air forces are basically, to a large extent, still very in place and strong. The war with NATO will be a different war than in Ukraine, because we have credible air forces and credible navy. So yeah, this is going to be a challenging time. And the way they rebuilt their armed forces, and of course have learned from the war in Ukraine, the Russians are becoming better as a result of this war. But the fact that they are willing to have close to 1 million soldiers wounded and killed by now, for what? For little territorial gains, for...
What is the goal, the biggest?
Well, the goal was basically to make sure that the government in Kiev was toppled, that they had Ukraine as theirs, could use all the resources most likely, and of course have the buffer zone, which is more than 1,000 kilometers, which is the size of Ukraine. So that is what they wanted. And they haven't achieved any of their strategic goals. That's why they continue to fight, despite the 1 million soldiers dead and wounded. And because they are fighting on, Ukraine has to fight on, because otherwise they lose their country.
When we talk about Ukraine, and especially here in Hague these days, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be a man who would support Ukraine, softly saying. What do you think would be the outcome? I mean, what will he do, actually? And, you know, he's talking about the negotiations with Russia. They're still ready to keep on negotiating. We don't see any results of this. So what are your expectations from this point of view? Would the U.S. actually stop helping Ukraine, or any other prospects? How would you see the, you know, the future, foreseeable future for Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the decisions in the U.S. Will be with regard to Ukraine. What I do know is that if you look at NATO and the promises NATO made to Ukraine, so in 2024 we promised Ukraine 40 billion euros. At the end of 2024 that was 50 billion. So we did more than we promised, so that's good for Ukraine. If you look at 2025, first 6 months of the year, already 35 million has been committed by the nations, and Europeans and Canadians are stepping up for Ukraine, so that is good. The mission in Wiesbaden and Satu is doing its work, which means the coordination of all the goods that need to go to Ukraine, the coordination of the logistics, the coordination of the training, and to make sure that the logistic hubs are secure. So that is ongoing. JTEC, the Lessons Learned Center in Poland, has been set up and is doing its work. So although there's less communication about it, there's still a lot of things going on, and there's still a lot of assistance from, again, 50 nations. Now the Ukraine Defense Contact Group is under new leadership. I think it's the UK primarily with Germany that is doing that, but the work continues. So despite the fact that the US might do a little bit less, but whether the US really will stop supporting Ukraine, I haven't heard that, but we'll have to see. But at least what I see in general is that there is still a lot of support for Ukraine. President Zelensky is here. He was at the dinner, and I saw him talk to President Trump, and I think it was a good and warm conversation. So it's not. I don't think there's necessarily a problem. But the situation has changed. But the Russians are not winning. The Ukrainians are not losing. So I think, the discussions on a ceasefire are very important. The Ukrainians have basically said we're willing to accept all the rules for this ceasefire. Now it's up to the Russians to actually step up.
Well, they obviously don't want to. But I have another question. Do you think? I mean. Do you know maybe the position of Donald Trump when NATO says that Russia is a long-term threat, and it's written in a communique? What's the position of the U.S. from this?
That Russia is a long-term threat.
Trump agrees with that.
Yeah, I mean, he is the head of state. He has agreed to this communique. Yeah. It's consensus in NATO. So the U.S. also sees Russia as a long-term threat.
What do you think his next steps would be? Trump's? Okay, NATO's?
The summit was about the capability targets. So now I think the money will be on the table. The next weakest link is, of course, the defense industrial capacity in Europe and in North America. Okay. So we will have to make sure together that if we have money and you go to the shop but the shelves are empty, then you can have a lot of money, but you can't buy anything. Then the money doesn't help. So the next thing is that we need to make sure that the armed forces get their weapon systems, their ammunition, and all the things they need. So that is, I would say, the next focus for the next year.
Okay. Last thing I wanted to ask you about is the fifth article, Article 5 of NATO. There has been some kind of, I don't know, confusion, I would say, about the Article 5. Donald Trump was not ready before to be clear about this, and then he said here in Hague, in Netherlands, that yes, he would be with European allies if anything happens. How would you evaluate this? Is he ready?
I'm convinced the US will live up to its obligations in the Washington Treaty with regard to Article 5.
So the US is still an ally and it's not getting anywhere?
The US is not leaving NATO. That's not the discussion in Washington.
I was wondering, do you feel that there is in principle, there is a unity here? We have started with this, that there are some kind of...
You say in principle time and time again.
No, I said just the first time. First time.
There is unity on the topics that are on the table.
And you said it was reduced, the number of issues. It was reduced to make clear decisions on important things. But there are people who are saying that it was reduced actually to please Donald Trump.
I think it was reduced to make sure that all the leaders, including Donald Trump, are talking about the important issues and not talk about everything as we normally see in those summits, where every nation adds things to the agenda which are not necessarily extremely important. So the limiting of the scope, I think, is helpful to make sure that we talk about the things in a short... We only had a morning session, so that we didn't have a lot of time. Therefore, we limited the scope, or they limited the scope. I say we, I'm no longer there. But...
You're here.
I'm here, but NATO limited the scope of the meeting because there was one session that was agreed, and then talk about the important stuff.
Yeah, and Ukraine's status here is different from what it was before on NATO summits. What do you think of that?
I think there is a nuke on the defense ministers level this afternoon, after the leaders summit. So it's not that nothing is happening, but on the leaders, there wasn't a nuke on the leaders level. That's true. But he's here. He will be able to talk with the ministers on the topics. It is a council, so there still can be discussions and decisions on the level of the ministers. So I think that is also still happening.